We are back. Goal-Oriented Season 2, Episode 5 is here. I'm joined by OU Daily Sports editors Colton Sully and Mason Young. We started off this podcast last week with what just happened, and we're doing the same thing.
Yeah, I'm still not sure what happened. Honestly, shocked after last week. Probably double shocked. It's a pretty bad performance from OU down in Fort Worth, Mason.
Yeah, in case you missed it, they lost, what was the final 55-24
55-24
to TCU. Not their best showing. Defense, torched. Injuries, piled up. Offense, bad. And where do they go from here? It's anybody's guess.
For sure, and we're obviously OU's heading into Dallas for a big game against Texas. Not sure the quarterback's going to be. Brendan Venables said it as much today at his press conference. We don't even know who or what players are going to be available for this game, given how many came down with injuries last week in Fort Worth. So who are some of those guys that obviously may or may not be playing this week?
Well, obviously Billy Bowman went down with an injury. Theo Weiss went down with an injury. I mean, you can go down the list. Demond Harmon got carted off with a scary injury. He's probably most likely not playing. Dylan Gabriel, like you said, Austin, had a scary hit to the head. He's still unknown, his status. Davis Bevel obviously came in the game for Dylan. But like Brent Venables said today, we're still not even sure if Dylan's hurt, that it's going to be Davis Bevel that gets the ball. Could be Nick Evers. General Booty got some time against TCU, so we'll just have to see.
One positive note, we did talk to Eric Gray last night, and it sounds like Eric Gray is doing fine after leaving the game. I think he went into the medical tent at one point during the TCU game, so I would expect for OU to have its leading rusher, but didn't really get clarity today from Brent Venables on Marcus Major. He obviously didn't make the trip to the TCU game. There's been some chatter that he rolled his ankle in the fourth quarter of the Kansas State game, and that may be what's limiting him right now. So they could really use that punch. Marcus Major really helped them out in the 2020 Texas game when they came from behind and won in 4 overtimes. So
Wanye in the sling.
Yeah, Wanye Morris in a sling. I think there's a decent probability that we see Tyler Guyton at left tackle this week.
Yeah.
Right tackle. Jeez. Too many tackles. Actually not enough from OU's defense. But anyway, so that's a couple more guys, but it would be good if OU has Eric Gray. Not sure about Marcus Stripling either. That's another edge rusher. Maybe they will get our Mason Thomas back, who hasn't played since the Kent State game. That would help them a lot coming off the edge, especially as they haven't produced very many sacks. But yeah, a lot of mystery right now, and especially given what the mystery is at quarterback, maybe it's time to break out our binoculars again.
No, I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze on that one. I mean, whoever's going to be behind center, that's not Dylan, probably not going to be very good. So also, this team sucks.
Also, in case this story hasn't been told before, when we met Brent Venables at his introductory press conference, he immediately knew that we were the binoculars kids, and he said, "Oh, well, you better not do that to me." So maybe even kind of thinking about that in the rear view a little bit is maybe another reason why the juice is not necessarily worth the squeeze.
This isn't Spencer Rattler and Caleb Williams, right? This is Davis Bevel versus Nick Evers. So
yeah,
or General Booty.
The stakes are not the same. So
yeah.
Before we head into preview Texas week, obviously TCU was able to have some pretty big plays against the Sooners, 4 touchdowns of 60 yards or more. Like you said, just seems like there's a few times every so often that there was a drive that the Horned Frogs just had some dude 60 yards downfield with no one around him, just complete busted coverages. So, guys, I mean, how is OU trying to fix those things? And what were some of the things that we've heard from players last night, players today, and coaches yesterday and coaches today about some of those things that they can improve on?
Don't know. Like Venables today was very adamant that it's not a communication issue. And so if it's not a communication issue, then what is it?
Yeah, it's not a practice issue. It's not a bought-in issue. It's not a communication issue. We're still not sure what the issue is. And players tonight said it's just little details that could have made that game way different. I have a hard time believing that. There was 5 or 6 times where I looked down the field. There was nobody within 30 yards. Max Duggan scored a 60-plus yard touchdown. So
it's just clear that there was situations where guys just weren't doing whatever their job was supposed to be doing. And so the only way to fix that is by doing your job. It's not any of those things that communication, whatever. Like it's not. There's those all play into it, but it's not any one of those things. The bottom line is it's like do what you're supposed to do within whatever is called.
Now, the one argument for obviously it being some of those little mistakes are clearly the big the big ticket plays that did happen. TCU comes out with, I think, 668 yards of offense, but a lot of that was from those big plays. And you look at it from, you delete those out, a busted coverage doesn't happen, and TCU's offense looks a whole lot different in terms of its production at that game. So I understand why they could definitely feel that way. Obviously, it's not the product that you'd think a Brent Venables offense could have, but we can't pretend to know what's going on inside those walls all the way. We can't pretend to know what they're doing schematically that's changing or what they aren't doing schematically that is changing. So that's something that we'll just have to continue to see as the season goes on. It's going to be a process, and maybe the Brent Venables process is going to take a little bit longer than we initially thought.
Yeah, it seems like there's just going to be some growing pains, and I think that that's inevitable at this point. I think we, after 3 weeks, saw what the defense did in Nebraska, and we sat there and said to ourselves, literally in this room at this table, and said, man, this OU defense is good already. Brent Venables has accelerated the timetable for having a good defense at OU again. And then 1 week later, it came crashing down to earth. And I don't know, like, I just don't, and like you said, we can't pretend to know fully what's going on, but I don't understand how that happened. Like how has there been such a stark difference week to week? And so, but they obviously have a better sense than we do of what it's going to take to fix this, and so we'll see what they come up with.
There's a lot smarter people in that building that know what they're talking about and know a whole lot more about football than we do. But you make a good point, Mason. Like 2 weeks ago, we were talking about this team could potentially make a playoff, and now they're sitting at 3-2, and people are saying the program's over. So, but it's a pretty stark difference from 2 weeks ago.
For sure. So obviously we didn't hit on it all the way, but looks like the three main competitors for those snaps are at quarterback are going to be Davis Bevel, who played majority of the game against TCU after Dylan's injury. He completed 7 of 16 for 50 yards. Didn't look very efficient. Then General Booty came in and had a few handoffs there late in the fourth quarter. And then maybe Nick Evers, who traveled last week for the first time all season. He didn't make the trip to Lincoln for the Nebraska game. However, he was in Fort Worth for the TCU game. Maybe that's because he has family down there. He's from Flower Mound. They just wanted to give him a chance. Or maybe he's improving. But, guys, we heard Brent Venables talk a little bit about Nick Evers and his growth since early enrolling last spring. So what were some of the takeaways from what he said about Nick Evers maybe being a potential player?
Yeah, Brent Venables said today that Nick Evers has took a big jump since fall camp, and just yesterday after practice, talking to some of the players, Nick Evers stayed late and was throwing with some of the receivers. I know Drake Stoops was out there with him, Jaden Gibson, and he was throwing dimes. So seems like the young freshman, is hungry and wants to see the field at some point, and very possibly could this week if things don't go well with Davis Bevel.
It'll be interesting because obviously Davis Bevel was thrown into a pretty tough situation in Fort Worth, just given the circumstance with a big deficit and coming in after an injury, and obviously not having a week of first team reps. But it'll be interesting to see if Davis, with a week of practice, with a week of working with some of the starters, could maybe put together a bigger performance if he is that starter. But we had a few, interesting scenarios that might happen that we talked about. So Mason, do you want to take us off with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a real feasibility. I think there's a reasonability that Davis Bevel gets the start, and then maybe if things don't go as well, we see Nick Evers. I'm really not sure about where General Booty plays into this, guys. All respect to him, but it kind of we haven't heard any sort of indication that he really. I guess obviously he's, like Brent said, he's getting an opportunity, but the guys we seem to be hearing a lot more about are Evers and then obviously Bevel, having played and been the first one to enter. So I think there's a very reasonable scenario where it's Bevel starts, but if things don't go so hot, then maybe Evers gets a chance. And I think the thing that we've heard about Evers that makes him intriguing is that potentially he opens up the playbook for them a little bit because of his mobility compared to Bevel. We saw pretty much precisely the same thing unfold last year with Caleb Williams taking over for Spencer Rattler against Texas, that they gave Texas more things to look at and more things to have to account for because of Caleb Williams' ability to use his legs, and showed that off several times during that game. So maybe maybe next year is going to just be like another microcosm, not next year, but this weekend is going to be like a repeat in a sense of you go with one quarterback and maybe another quarterback emerges out of that, because last year was really deja vu with Williams taking over for Rattler after Rattler got benched the year before. So OU Texas brings out the best in some people and the worst in some people. It just is that prolific of a game in college football. And I think that we're headed toward a scenario where I think there's a real possibility that we see some quarterback shuffling again this time, and maybe someone else emerges than who we originally thought would kind of lead this offense without Dylan Gabriel.
And I think one of those things that makes sense with your point is Nick Evers is getting sort of this buzz, I guess, for this week because of what Caleb was able to do last week. We know Nick Evers has the talent. He has the arm strength. He was a highly recruited guy out of high school, similar to Caleb, but not nearly the same, I guess, blue chipness, I'd say, as him. But, I mean, that's the thing. This game brings out the best in people, like you said, and what better situation for Nick Evers to really show what he's made of in this sort of environment. But then there's also the flip side of it, which is Davis Bevel probably won't make some of those freshman mistakes that Nick Evers might if he's thrown in there for his first collegiate snaps in such a high-profile game. So I think that's the pros and the cons between the two of them. And it seems like maybe one of those two guys might, contribute on Saturday. And then I think it works out in OU's favor that they're a little bit eerie towards maybe saying who's going to get the bulk of those snaps. They're playing that to their hand, and maybe it will be Dylan. Maybe Dylan will be healthy enough to play. We don't know by now, but maybe we'll hear that later on in the week.
Yeah, assuming Dylan doesn't play for either three of those guys, whether it's Davis, General, or Nick, they're going to make their first career start at the Cotton Bowl, and one of the biggest rivalries of college football. And I think that's you can't understate that. And I just think that it's going to be a tough game for whoever, if it's not Dylan, whoever starts in that game.
I think another thing, too, is that it seems like almost every year OU Texas comes down to is if OU's going to win, they have to run the ball well. We saw that last year with Kennedy Brooks rushing for it felt like 280 yards or something like that, like 300 yards. Not that much. That's an exaggeration.
It was like 230, though. Yeah.
It was still a lot. And so if you're going to play Davis Bevel or General Booty, you have to make sure that the offensive line has to come out and dominate and control the line of scrimmage, and you have to be able to run the ball effectively because those guys don't have the mobility and the escapability that Nick Evers makes up for.
Well, that's been a bright spot the last 2 weeks. I think Eric Gray's really broken out in the two losses, and we saw Javante Barnes last week score 2 touchdowns and rush for over 100 yards, or right at 100 yards. So, I think the offensive line and the running game is going to be a big, especially if Dylan doesn't play, it's going to be a big factor in this game.
So, yeah, I mean, like you said, with the running game, obviously it would help that if Dylan's able to play, just opening things up. But it'll be interesting to see. I think Colton brought it up earlier in the week, but Texas did beat Baker back in the day with Gerard Horde at quarterback, and I don't think they threw the ball more than 9 times in that game. They just run it down OU's throat. So it is feasible, but that's going to be something that, again, you have to rely on the defense to play a little bit better than it has, and maybe this is a good bounce-back game for that defense. But overall, I mean, there's sort of some parallels with what's happened to the Miami Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa over the last few weeks. That sparked a huge, I guess, conversation around the state of concussions and head injuries in the sport of football, and it comes back up with another lefty Hawaiian quarterback in Dylan now. So, Mason, does that play any role into maybe OU's decision, given what happened to Miami? Obviously, they fired their doctor after that whole incident went down, but you can never be too cautious with injuries like that.
I think there's a balance of ideologies at play here. I think obviously everybody that's a purveyor of football is cognizant of what happened to Tua, and seeing what happened and how he was allowed to come back and play a week later after his initial injury and then get injured again, and how based on that he probably should not have been playing against the Bengals after what happened against the Bills the week before. I think that definitely elevates the concern for a lot of people as far as Dylan Gabriel is concerned. And yeah, I think it is kind of eerily similar, kind of what their background is. I think reasonably so. That should elevate the concern. But at the same time, you also have to take this on a case-by-case basis, and you have to treat Dylan for what Dylan's situation is, what his symptoms are, what his readiness and feasibility to play is. So OU is going to be doing all their evaluations. Their medical staff is renowned as one of the best in the country and was getting a lot of praise on social media for the way that they handled all the injuries in the TCU game. And I think that's why it's reasonable that we could see Dylan Gabriel. I think it's reasonable that we might not, because they can't just sit there and say, oh, we have to be ultra cautious because of what happened to Tua. You have to evaluate what Dylan's situation is based on whatever his symptoms are and make the right call for him, whether or not he should or shouldn't be playing.
I think you make some great points there. Obviously, every concussion injury is different. Sometimes they take a while. Sometimes you can return from it quick, and we don't know what Dylan's situation is right now. So it'll be interesting to see, like I've said, if he's going to be a guy that's able to go on Saturday, although we probably wouldn't count for it given the severity of injuries like that and how it's important to be cautious for not just your football career, but also going forward as just a human being. So all those points play into account for what Oklahoma's quarterback situation is going to be. But for Texas, they're in their own little bind determining who's going to go under center for them. So are we going to see Quinn Ewers on Saturday?
I don't know, but if we do see Quinn Ewers, it's gonna be a different game than if we see Hudson Card. I mean, Quinn Ewers, if he didn't get hurt in that Alabama game, I think they win that game. I don't think they lose to Texas Tech if Quinn Ewers plays. So Quinn Ewers is going to be the best player on the field if he plays, and if not, then I think Oklahoma's defense can probably stick around with Hudson Card at quarterback. So we'll have to see. It's going to be really interesting. That's going to be the story of the week is whether Quinn Ewers plays against OU or not.
Ewers definitely has a lot of arm talent. I think that could really challenge OU secondary, especially given that Billy Bowman is banged up and it's unsure if he will play. I would assume that it's probably not likely that Damon Harmon plays.
Absolutely no chance he plays.
Yeah. So So they're going to have to fill some holes in the secondary.
Key Lawrence is playing banged up. I mean, you see him running after Duggan on that play. He's literally limping.
Yeah. So that's the component about having Ewers back that's potentially concerning is how he might be able to exploit a really thin secondary.
With Billy, if Billy doesn't play, obviously he got hurt against TCU.
Yeah.
It's going to be that secondary could be exposed real quick if Quinn plays.
They were exposed last week, really, even
with Max Duggan.
And it sounds like maybe some of those guys were playing hobbled, but they were exposed against the guys that they had before those injuries.
For sure.
And especially when you're playing against the sort of skill positions that the Longhorns do possess. Obviously, Xavier Worthy, a preseason first-team All-Big 12 selection, along with Bijan Robinson, who's, according to some, might be the best running back in all of college football. And obviously both of those players had huge games against OU in the Cotton Bowl last year. How can it be even more important that this team probably has better skill positions than TCU, probably better than anyone in the entire conference, and they just got torched by a team that maybe doesn't have the same weapons as they do?
I think it's really troubling that if you couldn't stop TCU, how can you expect to stop those three really skilled offensive players that you just mentioned? But the thing that really sticks out to me about Texas is their defense, how they played against Alabama, how they dominated Alabama's offensive line and shut down the running game for most of that game. I know Jamar Gibbs, obviously broke the big one, but for most of the game, Texas kept Alabama in check, and whoever's at quarterback for OU, it's not going to be pretty with Texas on defense. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's just really no other way to cut it. I think Texas's defense is significantly better than they've been in recent years, and they're just playing more well-rounded. Brent Venables today described them as playing a lot more disciplined, which is honestly, when you think about it, it's the parallel of what OU's doing right now, and that's more cause for concern. And so, I think that right now, not in terms of on paper and how they're playing, Texas very much looks like the better team.
For sure. And, we talked about this a little bit in our post-game Twitter spaces that we do after games, talking some Sooners football after the loss. But is there a time that we should be panicking about Brent Venables as head coach right now? Or is it one of those things where it's just there's a roster turnover, there's a new coaching staff, completely new, pretty much everything with this program? Going forward, is there anything to, worry about?
Well, there's definitely some weird kind of things going on right now, I would say. I think we all took away from Brent Venables' press conference today that he was a little bit frustrated about some of the questions he was getting about fixing the defense and what it takes to get that right in his first year as head coach. And some of his answers were kind of curt and kind of short and kind of, again, showing a little bit of frustration about how things have gone so far. So from that standpoint, it's going to be fascinating to see what his response is. Everybody keeps saying this phrase that he won't flinch. We've heard that a lot this week and even after the game from everyone on the team. It could be Jeff Lebby, it could be a defensive player, that he won't flinch. And so let's see that in practicality. What does that actually look like? Is Brent Venables able to rally the troops and go win this game against Texas? That would be a very big moment in which he didn't flinch. So let's see it. And if we start to see signs of flinching, that's when we become concerned about Brent Venables' status as a head coach.
I think right now, this season, I think some of, first-year head coach flaws were kind of being seen. I think everybody just expected, or OU fans just expected Brent Venables to come in here with all new players and a whole new staff and just his first year as a coach and just win right away. And that's just really not how it works. I think we're seeing that right now. However, long-term, I think Brent Venables is going to be fine. I don't think Oklahoma is going to become Nebraska. He's recruiting really well. He's got a top 5 recruiting class right now. I don't think there's very much concern for Brent Venables as a head coach moving forward. But for this season, you're definitely seeing some of those, first-year head coach mistakes and just trying to figure out how to run the show as opposed to just calling one side of the ball.
I think you're definitely right. We see that Joe Castiglione has a really good track record with picking coaches that have success long-term. Just look at Bob Stoops, and honestly, you can look at a lot of the coaches on OU's that coach any of OU's current varsity sports and see that same thing. You can either see long-term success or you can project long-term success based on what they're doing right now. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one thing. And I think another thing, too, is like you were saying with the expectations. This roster, I think, was really overestimated. I really don't think this OU roster is as talented as people thought it would be going into the season.
Yeah, I guess there's nothing really to compare it to because you can't compare it to what Lincoln Riley did in year one because he inherited an entire roster that he could
have won the Natty.
He inherited an entire roster that was already part of a program that he was in under Bob Stoops. There's really no situation where OU can compare to a first-year coach having success in that first year, but also not understanding that it might take a second. And I think the one thing for me that I've gone back and forth with is maybe this roster is not where we thought it might be, but also comparatively to the Big 12 in terms of recruiting, in terms of some of those brand names, OU does seem to have maybe more talent than most of the rosters in this conference. But then there's also the other point that's like, well, OU only had one all Big 12 first team selection in Michael Turk. So, where does that star level from the recruiting ranks turn into that? I don't know. I mean, Brent Venables has talked about it himself. Recruits don't make a team. It's the team doing the things that make them win.
Add in that the Big 12 is really just a mosh pit this year, and it really looks like everybody is just going to beat up on each other down the stretch. There really isn't that many teams that have super, super impressed in all facets of the game at all times. I mean, obviously you sit here in Kansas, OSU, and TCU are undefeated, but they've all had their moments where they maybe looked kind of human. And so the Big 12 is just, I think, a little bit of a different animal this year. Not complete wholesale change, but a little bit more even across the board potentially.
For sure. And I mean, Venables is still continuing to recruit well. We haven't seen any turnover from there given these 2 losses. It'll be seen if the doors fall off completely, but I think one of the biggest takeaways for me the last 2 weeks is some of the demeanor from the players. It's understanding that something needs to be done, but also trying to not panic. And then Brent Venables himself has talked about some of the response and some of the buy-in that the players have had, and it's still there. So I think from a culture perspective going forward, having that so early on is something that could be a huge takeaway for these future teams. And like Colton said, I think that there's not a whole lot to maybe be worried about right now with this team, although maybe it gets a little bit worse and we can rediscover that conversation.
Well, I also think now, fans are going to probably look for a big response, but if your quarterback's injured and all these guys are injured, it's going to be harder to bounce back and put together some wins. And I think, fans are going to have to understand that they lost some key guys at some key positions, and they're probably not going to beat Texas.
And even before those injuries, we knew the depth of this team was not necessarily where it needed to be. We know what it's like at linebacker, past David Glabu and Danny Stutzman. There's really not a whole lot there, and we're seeing it at safety. I mean, with no Billy, no DeMond, a hobbled Key. I mean,
Yeah.
who's even going to step up at that position?
Yeah, well, we talked to Justin Harrington tonight after practice, and obviously earlier in the season he was playing that cheetah position along with Deshaun White. That's kind of a hybrid position for like a linebacker or like an extra safety in a sense. And now last week Justin he slotted in and played safety after Billy went out. And obviously he's an experienced guy. He was the top junior college safety in the country when OU recruited him for his class. And so, but we didn't really see him flash. You were mentioning earlier that he really didn't flash beyond the box score. He had like 8 tackles, which was second or third on the team for the game, but he might have also been responsible for one of the busted touchdown plays of that. They had 4 that were over 60 yards.
And that's the other thing. I mean, given the depth, him playing cheetah for the majority of the fall camp, how much has he even been able to play safety? What kind of role did that play in some of these busted coverages? And obviously Trey Morrison is playing safety now, but we know from spring that he was working at corner originally. So maybe does that play a role in some of these guys' busted coverages? Maybe just not having experience at safety as much as some of these other guys in Brent Venables' scheme?
That definitely could play a role. And with all the injuries, that's gonna have to happen more and more. But like Justin was saying tonight, it's those little details that they got to get fixed, and he thinks they will. So we'll have to see on Saturday.
It'll be really interesting to see how the defensive line plays as well. Alabama obviously has Will Anderson, who's one of the best premier pass rushers in all of college football, and Texas absolutely shut him down with their really young offensive line.
Yeah.
And OU hasn't gotten anything going off with the pass rush the last 2 weeks. So are they just going to get destroyed? Or, I mean, that's been a huge flaw of this defense the last 2 weeks with how bad its performances has been the pass rush. So it'll be interesting to see that matchup.
Yeah, looking for a response from somebody. Reggie Grimes was so good through non-conference play. He was playing like one of the best defensive ends in the Big 12, and he's just disappeared over the last 2 games. So
it's almost like it's one of those things where he's the only guy on that front that maybe is flashing or doing anything, that he's just getting double teamed every play. And Ethan Downs or maybe some of those other ends can't get the pressure in those one-on-one situations that is coming on the back end of Reggie Grimes getting bottled up.
It'd be interesting to see, like you were saying, if the scheme changes or the game plan changes, see if we get some more blitzes in or something due to the lack of pass rush with the D-line the last couple of weeks. But like Mason said, Reggie Grimes, where's he been the last 2 weeks?
I think, again, another issue is that group just still like really isn't playing cohesively anymore. Somebody makes one mistake among that group and it messes up the whole defensive line, and they don't get a pass rush on that play because someone threw off the rush, or if they took the wrong angle as they're kind of moving the line of scrimmage, then somebody gets away for a run like that Adrian Martinez play where he went right up the middle and put the game away.
A lot of that, I think, with Adrian Martinez was that mobile quarterback type thing. And a lot of people wouldn't characterize Max Duggan as a mobile quarterback, but obviously we saw what he did, 67-yard touchdown or whatever. So I think some of those plays, they're close, they're in the backfield, and the quarterback just takes off. So they got to do a better job at that.
And OU's been deploying that 3-3-5 sort of 3-man front defense. It'll be interesting to see if they change that at all, given the pass rush not getting a whole lot going. Obviously, with the secondary depth being depleted, can they even get 5 defensive backs on the field? All jokes aside, but I mean, it'll be interesting to see if they do that, make any changes there. Because, I mean, defensive coordinator Ted Roof talked about it after the game. He talked about it yesterday, about how when you get beat like that and your defense gets slaughtered like that, you look at everything. So do you look at changing the scheme? Do you look at changing the personnel? Do you give Jaron Kanak some more snaps? Do you start playing some freshmen? It'll be interesting to see all of those things if they're brought into account.
I would think, regardless of who plays quarterback for Texas, whether it's Card or it's Ewers, I think this week would be conducive to going back to the 4-man front and having less DBs on the field. There's a balance there. I think there's a balance there. The reason I say that is because I would think that with a less mobile quarterback, like both those guys are comparatively to a Max Duggan or to an Adrian Martinez, you would want more rushers on the field. But I can also understand the balance of your secondary is paper thin, and maybe you'd have
Especially if
like,
Quinn Ewers
yeah.
plays and he's
Yeah,
dicing up your
if you'd
secondary.
like to have a lot of guys out there to kind of cover some bases and just have more guys on the field to cover those wide receivers like Xavier Worthy that are so good. So yeah, that's a decision that they'll have to make is pick your poison, almost in a sense.
And no matter who's out there, you're not going to want Xavier Worthy in a one-on-one situation. Last year we saw it when he catches a bubble pass and takes it 70. We've seen him moss people plenty of times. And it happened from some of these lesser receivers that TCU has with a one-on-one situation. And Brent Venables has talked about putting players in positions to play to their strengths, and putting people in one-on-one situations is a credit to TCU, but also something that no defense really wants to do.
Something Brent and Woody were saying today, it's not like they were getting beat very bad in the pass game. It was that some of those pass interference calls really hurt them. They're not getting their head around. So just, playing more focused and knowing where they're at and getting their head around, trying to make a play on the ball and not getting called for pass interference. I think that's going to be a big focus against Texas.
That's a big thing I would highlight too. Is it seemed like on those pass interferences that got called on Woody and that got called on Jaden Davis, they just weren't even trying to find the ball.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, you will get flagged.
Yeah.
So that's a big point of emphasis. I think also that for as much as Justin Broyles plays, that I think they need more out of him. Obviously, they view him as a leader. It sounds like from what we're hearing about the pulse of this team that him and Braden Willis are really kind of the two galvanizing leaders of this team. But the play has to reflect that too. And Braden's reflecting that with his play. He might be the best offensive player on this team right now.
Yeah.
But I feel like OU probably needs more out of Justin Broyles if the defense is going to make up for the deficiencies they have in personnel this week.
Obviously, in 2020, OU went into this game without a win in conference play, and a big Texas win sort of turned their season around. Not necessarily saying that this could happen this year, but a game like this could definitely be that, I guess, game that serves as the turning point in this season's team. And I think this could be a season-defining moment up here or down there in Dallas. Is there any way that you guys could see a win here sort of turning the tide for this program?
Definitely. Like I was saying earlier, it's OU Texas. Anything can happen. Like Mason mentioned, Gerard Hurd beat Baker Mayfield in 2015. An unranked Texas team beat a top 10 Oklahoma team with Charlie Strong at head coach. So anything can happen. It's OU Texas, and Quinn Ewers still hasn't been announced as the starter, so that changes a lot of things if it's Hudson Card versus Davis Bevel.
And we still haven't even really seen that much from Quinn. Maybe those two first drives against Bama were just so choreographed that he just did it to perfection. We know he has the arm talent, but
Still a fresh. This is still his first year starting.
Still a first-year starter, and that's the thing. I mean, OU's going to have a first-year starter in the Cotton Bowl. Well, Texas is going to have the same thing with either Hudson Card or Quinn Ewers, who both have not started in this game.
This will be the craziest environment any quarterback that plays in this game has ever played in.
Yeah, it's the. Me and Mason were there last year, and obviously everything that game meant. And man, it is just a ruckus crowd. So it's something that you can't really prepare for.
Davis Bevel said, I think after the first game, the one chance that we've gotten to talk to him this season, like after practice, he said that running out for that first game at OU was so cool because he had never seen that many people cheering for him before in a game. I think he has said that he's had that many people cheering against him before.
Maybe at Clemson.
Just imagine what that atmosphere is going to be like for him if he indeed gets the start in this game at quarterback. I mean, he is going to have a lot of people cheering for him, yes, but there's going to be equally as many people cheering against him. And so there really is no atmosphere like that. There's very little that can prepare you for that. And so it's going to be a tall task from a psychological standpoint.
And that's something I talked to Thomas Lott about this week. Obviously made his first career start against Texas, and there's really nothing that can prepare you for it. You're really getting thrown out into the fire. Your first collegiate football game that you're starting comes in that game. That's pretty crazy.
Brent Venables has been so consistent with talking about how you prepare for every game the same, no matter if it's OU Texas, no matter if it's the national championship, no matter if it's UTEP. Now, of course, that's probably the way that a lot of coaches think. It's definitely how Brent Venables thinks and how he teaches this team. But even though you think that way, you definitely get those jitters when you're walking out there and you feel like that game's different. It's just human nature for you to maybe have some butterflies or have some things sink in differently. And, it's where players are made of. You think of all of the plays in this rivalry with so many great players, and, you can really solidify yourself. We were talking to Javante Barnes about that tonight, and he's a freshman, but, you can make your mark in this game and become legendary. That's what happens in the Red River. So anything can happen. You know, Davis Bevel can rebound and have some crazy game that cements himself in OU lore. Anything can happen, like we've said. So anything can happen as well for a journalist, even if you aren't playing football. We're going to be down in Dallas, and we're going to go to the fair, hopefully on Friday night. Get in that experience, just one of the coolest atmospheres and that you could be at. I think it's the best atmosphere in college football, probably in college sports in general. I mean, a game in the middle of a fair with crazy people everywhere. So, what are some of your big ticket food items you're trying to get, and are you guys pretty excited to maybe soak all that in?
I haven't done enough research yet, but we know that I am always looking. So we will figure out what the food item is that I really want to try out of this experience. The biggest thing for me, no game day this year, and I understand why. If I was them, I would go to Kansas TCU because I think that's a really fun matchup right now. Not so much for the success, really more so for the memes, in my opinion. But
although they both are undefeated in ranked.
yeah, it's but that in and of
crazy.
itself feels like very memey.
But me and Mason were looking at this earlier. They're on FS1 and OU Texas is on ABC.
That's honestly kind of crazy. I did not
Yeah.
I did not make that connection. But yeah. So that will be a little bit different. We might not have to pull up quite as early on Saturday morning. But it still should be like a very cool atmosphere as that venue continues to pick back up from the year where it was canceled due to COVID.
Hopefully that venue's a little easier experience than we had last week. Trying to get into Fort Worth.
We're not even going to get into that, but Con Bowl is still sold out. I don't
Yeah.
think it's ever going to be an issue of that bowl not getting sold out.
Yeah.
But we're expecting to get to Dallas a little bit earlier on Friday, maybe spending a few hours down at the fair. Last year we didn't get in the full experience. I'm hoping to ride a few rides or something. Probably will end up spending like $200 because that place is so expensive. But I'm definitely going to try out some more food. Definitely going to soak it all in.
Maybe I won't get screamed at by the parking lady this time.
Yeah, Mason was trying to back into a spot last year, and it was like one of the scariest things.
Well,
I've
we
ever
got yelled
watched.
at by some people last week too.
That's
Trying to
true.
park.
Yeah.
Some cops.
People
Yeah.
need to chill, man.
Yeah.
We're just having fun.
Or we're just bad at driving. That's also a fair assessment.
I guess. Sure.
Well, we've sort of gone over our predictions for what we're going to do in Dallas, but what are we thinking in terms of this game, Red River Showdown predictions?
You're gonna make me go first, Mason?
Yeah, I am. Do it.
Man, like we said, anything can happen. Could definitely see this game being a blowout based off last week, but I'm gonna go with a closer game than some people might expect. I'm gonna go 34-24 Texas.
That seems like a really good pick. That's probably about the area that I would go. I'm going to bump that up a little bit. I think I want to go like 35-27 Texas. Again, I think kind of my intuition on this is that, and kind of really more so collectively our intuition based on what we've heard today. But I wouldn't be surprised if Davis Bevel gets a start. I wouldn't be surprised if things go awry and Nick Evers comes in at some point in the game. And I think maybe he'll make it interesting. But you can't have Spencer Rattler or Caleb Williams magic every year. As much as you'd like to, and as magical as this game often is, the odds aren't always in your favor. We literally just have mentioned, I think twice on this podcast, that OU lost to Gerard Hurd, a converted wide receiver at quarterback one year.
There's been some ugly OU Texas games.
Yes.
There really has.
Yes, and so that
Tyrone Swoops was the first
he
person.
played
I
in that
remember
game as
one.
well
too.
Yeah.
And so
Case McCoy, the ghost of Case McCoy, looked like his older brother in the OU Texas
Yeah.
game.
right.
I remember being a little kid and I was like, who is McCoy? Like, he has a brother? Because I was a little kid. But he looked insane in that game.
Landry Jones, Blake Bell.
And so the odds just aren't in OU's favor. And given that we picked them to bounce back and win last week and failed miserably, at this point with how the season is going, I think we have to pick them to lose or barely win and just see what happens.
For me, I'm going last. Obviously, just like you said, anything can happen. I mean, Nick Evers could have a magical Caleb Williams 2.0 performance. Davis Bevel could be efficient and run the offense. I know you could have 400 rushing yards and go stomp Texas, and the defense could get better. And it could be a real turnaround game, or they just get stomped from the finish. But it's really hard for me to pick this OU team right now, even though I'm totally open to any score for this game. If you told me looking to the future and OU won by 30, I could be like, maybe. If you told me Texas won by 80, I could be like, yeah. So I think I'm going to go Texas on this one. It's too hard with what this OU team doesn't have right now, with how it's played the last 2 weeks, for me to pick the Sooners in this one. So I'm going to go, I think I'm going to go 38-20 Texas. I'm going to go a little bit bigger margin. I think Quinn Ewers might have that magical moment if he plays. That kid is just probably the
He's
most
special.
talented player in the Big 12 right now. And that might be his coming out party. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, he's a special player. Definitely could be his coming out party. I do think, though, if OU does win this game, it's going to be on some crazy turnover at the end of the game, kind of like Bijan against Tech. Something always crazy happens in this game. So OU's going to have to try and create some havoc, create some crazy plays on defense, especially if they're going to want a chance to win this game, especially if Dylan Gabriel's not playing.
You even go to last year that Bijan fumbled. Caleb Kelly punched it out, and then Kennedy Brooks scored on the next play to put it away.
Yep.
But there's a chance that game goes even longer, is even more back and forth, or Texas wins if not for that defensive turnover at the end. So you're right. Yep. That is often a commonality. And then the year before, Trey Brown's interception ended it.
Yep.
So
you always think of that moment. I mean, there's so many moments in this rivalry where, you think of, and even the Caleb Kelly one like that. And like you said, Trey Brown's interception. He's also had the sack in the Big 12 championship game. There's always a moment in this game. So who's it going to be? It's one of those things where who steps up for this OU team and delivers a moment or delivers that play that maybe puts their season in a completely different trajectory. I mean, I think this is what we're looking at. I think OU really needs that person to step up, and what better time for it to be in OU Texas. But like I said, I could see this game going either way, just given the rivalry that this game provides. But I'm going to go a little conservative and go Texas on this one. But let's kick it over to Colin McDaniel, our producer, our go-to guy that understands electronics, because we don't. He's got a little question for us. So, Colin, hit us with your mystery question.
Okay, so me and my dad, we actually had a conversation about this once because long before I was an OU fan, right? My family used to go to go to the state fair during the game, which is secretly the best time to go to the state fair of Texas because there's no one there. The public avoids it like the plague. Like we were talking about, would this rivalry ever move outside of the Cotton Bowl? Because I feel like sometimes it comes out like once every so often years, like the deal just got extended to 2025. But after that, I know Texas has expressed interest in making it kind of a back and forth kind of game. Plus, someone always kind of loses a home game to it because, someone has to be the home team, someone has to be the visitor team. So I just kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Do you think it would ever move out of the Cotton Bowl?
That's a great question. I think there's so much uncertainty following this game, following college football in general, with conference realignment and what's going to happen in the SEC. We could see something totally different. Obviously, this game, they don't play the Cotton Bowl at the Cotton Bowl anymore. They play it in Jerry World. And this is the only standing football game that's played at this stadium. And you look at it and you're like, man, this place stinks. It's kind of a shithole. The Cotton Bowl, it has cracks everywhere. The press box is huge, but it's not the greatest thing in the world.
You sit down and you might catch on fire because everything is reflective metal.
Nothing. I mean, it just seems it's so outdated. That thing's not getting renovated anytime soon. But that's part of the allure. It's at the state fair. It's at the Cotton Bowl. This game loses all of its zazz if it's not at the Cotton Bowl. It's not in the middle of the state fair. And man, I couldn't imagine this game being played anywhere else. The OU Texas games felt so weird in Jerry World in Arlington rather than at the actual Cotton Bowl. It's always weird when I watch a Texas game and I see it at Darrell K. Royal because I have no idea what that stadium looks like because I'm so used to watching OU games that I always see OU playing in Texas in the Cotton Bowl. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts, but I'd be pretty upset as a college football, as someone that follows college football, to see that game move out of there.
I have a couple different leanings and thoughts about it. One, I agree with you. It's very weird to see their games at Darrell K. Royal and not having ever been there. From a media perspective, in the side of covering OU, I think it would be really interesting to see a game at Darrell K. Royal, watch a game there, and just see what that's like. I think the inverse is true about Texas playing OU in Norman. How would fans travel? What would that atmosphere be like? I would get the feeling that they would probably travel pretty well, and that it would be a pretty big deal, and that stadium would be packed out, and it would be a lot of big games with a really big game type atmosphere. So I think that potentially could be good. I also understand the pageantry of the Cotton Bowl, and maybe what's a good middle ground is that they need to demolish the current Cotton Bowl and build a new stadium right there, and then let that one rot into oblivion over time. And basically just kind of, in a sense, reestablish the tradition a little bit, but still keep that feel that you were talking about of being at the State Fair of Texas and what that surrounding atmosphere means to people more or less and more so than the actual stadium itself, which, agreed, is pretty ugly.
I mean, you make it. Sorry to cut you off, Colton, but you make a new New Year's Six Bowl. You put a a brand new stadium smack dab in the middle of the State Fair, and you just let it ride, and you probably make a ton of money off of it. So that's a good point. I've actually never heard that one, but Colton, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I agree with everything you guys said. There's something nasty about OU Texas, like the fair.
It's nasty, and you love it. It's the best part of college
everybody
football.
next to each other, an
It
old ass
stinks
stadium.
a little bit. Yeah.
But
What's really weird is you walk out there super early in the morning when the sun's still coming up, and it's almost kind of like dewy and actually kind of cool. And then by
Then it
kickoff,
gets
it's
hot.
disgustingly hot.
yeah, but I think you guys make some good points. That'd be wild to see OU Texas in Norman or Austin. I know those fan bases would go crazy for those games, but I could also see it being moved to Jerry's World. And to your point, to making a new New Year's Six Bowl at the proposed stadium that Mason said. I don't know if Jerry's going to let that happen, but. What Mason was saying, I think the best option probably is to just make some renovations to the current stadium. It's falling apart, like you said. You could keep it at the fair that way, and you could make it a more comfortable, venue for media and fans, and keep the pageantry alive. So I think that's the best way to go.
And that's the only counterpoint, is that there's no reason to renovate that stadium if they're only playing one game a year in it. It just doesn't make much sense. So maybe they'd need to turn it back into a bowl game or something.
Or maybe you could play some high school championships there.
That was
have some concerts
that was my
there.
thought.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's opportunities for other university games to be played there. Not necessarily Texas, but
or not even necessarily a New Year's Six Bowl. Maybe just another bowl.
Yeah.
Move the Iron Skillet game there with SMU and TCU.
Yeah,
and,
maybe.
and
That'd
that
be cool,
that
actually.
fills another slot and generates some revenue.
Yeah.
I will say the Dallas Stars played a game there one time, and the atmosphere was absolutely fantastic.
Oh, I think
It
they
was
had the winter.
so
I think
cool.
they had
Yeah,
the Winter Classic.
the
there,
Winter
hockey
Classic,
game.
yeah.
It's pretty fun.
That
they
was
had a
so
hockey
cool
game
to
at the
see
Cotton
that.
Bowl. It was pretty cool. Yeah.
I'm really excited for Colton to get his first taste of some of the OU Daily, I guess, things that have been passed down to me and Mason that we've experienced. Obviously, we're gonna have to stop and get some sort of fair food at 6:45 in the morning, pre-kickoff.
Gross.
It's just it's a tradition, and you're gonna walk in, you're gonna just destroy a spread of some Rudy's barbecue at 9:45, and it'll be weirdly the best barbecue you've ever had for some reason for breakfast. Barbecue for breakfast at the Cotton Bowl is just absolutely elite. I remember being like, this is heaven. So I'm
Looking forward to it.
I'm at
Not
the
a big
coolest-
barbecue guy myself, but I'll make it work.
We'll see what Mason eats at this fair.
Now, I think it should be noted before
yeah, can I get an entire plate of mac and cheese, please?
I'm not adverse to that. Mac and cheese at 9 a.m. Let's go. I think it
No
should
breakfast burritos.
I think
Oh,
it should be
gosh.
taken into account before we cut this off that there was a fox on the field during
There
last
was.
year's game.
There was.
You literally don't know what is going to happen when you play in this venue.
Mike Collum, how a fox ran on the field and then Caleb Williams sparked a 25-point comeback, or whatever it was, 21-point comeback.
Yeah,
Well, that's another thing. I mean, we have a column coming up.
we do.
Oh yeah, obviously. I don't even think we've ever talked about this really openly, but obviously every year a tradition between student papers is that the University of Texas's paper, the Daily Texan, and us, the Daily, we swap columns. So our column, that's basically a roast of Texas football, a roast of Texas at large, will go in their print edition. That's for OU Texas that they do. We no longer have weekly print papers, but we do special editions. However, their version will run on our online page that's Roasting OU, and it's always just a satirical, fun thing to do, and it's always a nice way to connect with other journalists. So that's going to be fun. Last year we had a really funny one, I think. It was one of the better ones in daily history. Now we don't have some of those funny voices helping us out, and we're kind of scared about what our end product might be tomorrow when we write this thing, but it's always something that's really fun added on to this week.
What we can tell you right now is that it starts with a monkey.
Oh,
Oh
God.
no, they know what that means.
well, we'll see.
Go read the column.
Anyway, guys, we appreciate you joining in on us for our 5th episode of Goal Oriented. I am your host, Austin Curtright, and this is Colton Sully and Mason Young. Special thanks to Colin McDaniel, who's been producing all these, and we'll see you next time. Head out to oudaily.com for all of your coverage needs, and got some good enterprise coming on this week. So check us out there. See ya.
Peace out.